Hello, welcome back to the Living in Alignment podcast. I am your host, Amy Starr Allen, and I'm joined today by the beautiful Ashley Easter. And Ashley is an intuition coach and an intuition coach extraordinaire. And she teaches people how to stop second guessing themselves and to trust their intuition. And after escaping a cult using her intuition, she now paves the way for others to stop second guessing themselves and start trusting their intuition. And I've been following Ashley for a couple of years since I first heard her on another podcast where she was being interviewed, and I got to hear her tell her story, which was really impactful for me. I'm somebody that has lived a lot of my life following my intuition and doing like some things that didn't seem like logical because I had a knowing about it. And when I heard her story, it really touched me about the power of our intuition and just the way that she's able to teach people more about how to connect with their intuition. And so since then, I started getting her daily intuition little messages and tips that she sends out, which are super helpful. And then I recently did a course of hers called Intuitive AF, which is a 3-day course, which was so amazing and so life-changing. And we'll share more about that as we go through this. But really, I just wanted to have Ashley on here because I know what a difference her knowledge and her teaching has made for me. And so I just want to get it out to more people. So how are you doing today, Ashley?
I'm doing so good, and I'm just really
Mhm.
glad to be here. I love that. I don't know if it's your middle name or your maiden name, but the star in your name, I love that. I stole my last name from my husband. My maiden name was Schnarr, which nobody can say. And so Easter, and I don't know, Star and Easter. I just feel like those two like sound really good together. So I'm really
Yeah.
glad to be here, and I don't know, I appreciate cool names.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's my maiden name. So I
I love it.
I grew up with that name until I got married in my mid 30s and changed it to my middle name. And now I'm divorced, and everybody thinks that I should go back to my maiden name, which, I might. It's just hard when first of all, I'd be competing. There's an Amy Starr who's a porn star that ranks number one on
Oh
Google.
no.
So I'd be
Well, those are
competing for that.
different
I think I'm the only
audiences.
Amy Star
So
Allen. So, and my kids are Allen. So I decided to just keep the Allen in my name. So,
yeah.
but,
Oh
yeah, but yeah,
my
I always liked having that as my name too.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a good one.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I know I mentioned briefly in your bio that you are a cult survivor, and I have heard your story about, how you intuitively guided yourself away
Mhm.
from that situation. And I would love it if you would share your story for the people that are listening here today.
Absolutely. So for me, I find that when I share my story, this is true of most cults. A lot of times cults come up with their own lingo. So they will either make up words that other people don't know what they mean, or they will take common words but put their own definition behind them. So I kind of feel like I have to explain like some different terms to kind of give you a good understanding of how I grew up. But um, I grew up in the independent fundamentalist Baptist church, and there's like 20 different kinds of Baptists. I'm not saying like all Baptists are this way, but it is overall pretty well considered a cult in and of itself. The documentary Let Us Pray that came out last year did a really good job of showing how they're all very connected, even though they say they're independent, and a lot of the abuse and scandals in there. Um, but both my grandfathers were pastors in this denomination. One lived in the north, the other was in the south in Virginia. I grew up in Virginia going to his church, and the church in and of itself was just very strict, very controlling. In the bylaws, it said things like you can't dance, you can't have any wine. It was very looked down upon to go to the movie theater. Um, to just do a lot of things that are seen as kind of normal and expressions of self. But when you kind of got down to the theology of it, it was just very authoritarian, very much focused on power and control, and specifically in the area of men and women. So men were always to be in charge in one shape or form in the church, and women were always to be submissive. So gender roles were like very strict, and it wasn't like gender roles out of, hey, this is what I individually personally want to do that happens to look very 1950s housewife. It was more like, no, this is the way God wants a woman to be. And if you don't, you're outside of God's plan. So there are things like that, lots of abuse cover-ups that I found out about. And yeah, it was just a toxic place in general. But on top of that, I was also homeschooled. And homeschooling can be a good choice. You know, we just saw the Olympics, and a lot of Olympic athletes are homeschooled so they can hone their craft. You know, during the pandemic, a lot of people were homeschooled for safety reasons. And, you know, I know some parents, their school district isn't offering what their child needs educationally. And so they do a homeschooling type thing. So it can be good. But if you look at sort of the roots of American homeschooling, um, they're they're very religiously based. A lot of the private Christian schools, a lot of homeschools kind of came out of a reaction to this ending of segregation in schools and feeling like, oh, you shouldn't, you know, mix students. And so while that wasn't necessarily what my family's belief was about it, there was always this kind of us against them mentality with the homeschooling, us versus the public school kids, and um, just really seeing it as a bad education and dangerous education, all of those things. And our homeschool was religiously based. We then got something called religious exemption, where basically it's a big FU to the government and just saying, like, you can't check us, you know, we're doing this for religious reasons. So we didn't have to
Mm.
send any test scores, like zero oversight, nothing like that. No mandatory reporters were required, nothing. Um, and for me, my homeschool education was very poor. A lot of the curriculum was their version of religion, wrapped up into things. So the science I got, I'm still untangling what is actually true and what I was told that was a complete and utter fairy tale. Um, like one of the main organizations we were interested in was called Answers in Genesis. And we like binged all their videos and trainings and books and used it as like a curriculum for school. Um, and one of the articles that you'll find on their website is about how probably back in the day, animals used to be able to talk. So just like bizarre things like that. Um, History was always askew, but just a lot of lack of education, lack of quality education. And what we did get as far as education was often very biased and just untrue. But it was also used as a tool for isolation. So for me growing up, I really didn't have friends outside of the church. There might have been a couple families who went to other churches and were also homeschooled, but we didn't even see them very much. So it's basically my family and the other people going to this very strict church. And so, you know, you're not seeing a lot of the world. There's this us against them mentality, this outside world is dangerous kind of thought process, and just so many rules, like so many rules. I experienced multiple forms of abuse. There's a lot of things I won't go into just because we didn't give a trigger warning at the beginning, but you know, just really having my autonomy squelched as a child, very young, being told I was rebellious and disobedient for just being a child. Even when I came out of the womb, they, you know, were saying, oh my gosh, you know, she looked around the room and she's already seeing who she can conquer. I'm like, no, I just came out of the birth canal and I'm thinking like, who are these crazy people? I gotta live with them for the next, you know, 20 years. Um, but lots of things happened to really squelch me as a person and to push down my sense of intuition. There was always this idea that you were supposed to obey without question. instant obedience, unquestioning obedience, first time obedience. Like we didn't even believe in the, you know, how parents count to three to give their child time to, no, that was seen as evil. If you don't obey as soon as possible, like so you're drilled into your mind that you don't think for yourself. If your intuition says one thing and your spiritual leader says another, you go with what the spiritual leader says. Um, so independent fundamentalist Baptist movement, homeschooling movement. Inside the homeschooling movement, there's these other movements. And one of them was called the patriarchy movement. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It's about adherence to the patriarchy. So men are to have power and control over women in the home, church, and society. Women are to be submissive to men in all things, typically to get married young and say yes to sex, have tons of babies, and really to live your life in service to whatever male spiritual leader was in charge of you. And then in addition to that, inside of the patriarchy movement is another movement. Like I like to picture it like those Russian nesting dolls, how they're like all stacked into each other, the same terrible doll, but they kind of stack in. So inside the patriarchy movement was the quiverful movement. And people may be most familiar with this from shows like The Duggars, 19 Kids and Counting, or Welcome to Plathville. An expose documentary that came out recently was called Shiny Happy People. But the word quiverful is taken out of context from the book of Psalms, and it says something like this: children are like arrows in a mighty man's quiver. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. So, taking this very literally, you should have a quiver full of children, a quiver full of arrows. And then the goal is, as you're having all these kids, to then shoot them out like arrows into different sectors of society: the home, the church, schools, media, politics, the arts. I feel like there was one more. Sink into these different sectors of society to influence the world with our patriarchal religious agenda. But it didn't stop there. I sat through a lecture as a teenager called the 200-year plan. Have you heard of the 200-year plan?
No.
Good. Very good. I'm glad you haven't. The 200-year plan is this: you have 10 kids. Those 10 kids have 10 kids. Those 10 kids have 10 kids. You're doing this. Your friends and family are doing this. And after 200 years, you have this astronomical amount of descendants that you're shooting out into the world. And basically, you are dominating the world with this patriarchal religious message through overpopulation. And so as a teen, I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, I guess my role is to get married and have those babies. So you feel like even your heart's desires are overridden by this is your role in the movement. And then the last little nesting doll in the batch was called the stay-at-home daughter movement. And this was born out of this idea that if married women submit to their husbands and children submit to their fathers, what do we do with those unmarried adult women who haven't found, their spouse yet? So the stay-at-home daughter movement was created, where you submit to your father, even as an adult woman, until he gives you away in marriage to another man that you then submit to for the rest of your life. And I was a stay-at-home daughter. I had a blog where I wrote about being a stay-at-home daughter. I had about 3,500 people following that blog. I was talking about how to adhere to the patriarchy in my life. And that was sort of the structure that I grew up in. So unsurprisingly, I experienced multiple forms of abuse. One of those instances was when I was of marrying age. I was in a courtship relationship with a man. We didn't call it dating because there was too much parental involvement to be dating. And he was abusive. And thankfully, in this movement, I was allowed to say no. I just couldn't say yes without permission. So I did break it off. But through that time, I went through all the classic PTSD signs, the panic attacks, the suicidal ideation, the depression, the extreme anxiety. And just this whole unraveling of like, I thought that this was going to be the one. I followed all the rules, I did all the right things, and I still got harmed. So then there was this really pivotal moment for me. I was listening to what everybody else was saying, what everybody else was telling me to do, how to respond, how to behave, um, telling people what had happened to me, not telling people what had happened to me, just saying he's a good guy who loves the Lord. It just didn't work out based on what my grandfather slash pastor slash spiritual leader had guided me to do. And I was just in this dark place of PTSD. So I had the depression, I had the suicidal ideation, I had the panic attacks, the anxiety, and just coming to grips with how much I had been harmed in this relationship, how much it had hurt, and realizing like I had done everything right. I had followed the rules and I still got hurt. And it wasn't so much that I wanted to leave this world. That crossed my mind too many times. But it was that when I would sleep, I would have panic attacks. I would wake up in panic attacks and I felt like I couldn't control it. And when I was awake, I would have this extreme anxiety, which would lead to panic attacks. It was like I just could not escape the pain. And then one night something happened. One night I was staying up really late. Again, didn't want to sleep because that felt scary because you can't control your dreams and the panic attacks there, but also just really suffering in this anxiety while I was awake. So I'd put in headphones and I would turn up the music really loud just to try to drown out the sound of my own mind. And I didn't realize at the time I was actually using kind of a meditative tool. Like that was not my goal at all. My goal was just to kind of try to block out some of the anxiety. But in that moment, I started to feel this, what it felt like a presence, like a weighty thing on my body. And I started to hear words that I didn't try to conjure in my conscious mind, that just started repeating over and over again. And it said, it's gonna be okay. Something big, something good is about to happen. It's gonna be okay. Something big, something good is about to happen. And looking back now, I know that was my intuition. I know this was coming from my subconscious mind. Now that I've trained in intuition, I know that this is a very common way that intuition can speak to you, but I didn't know what was happening in the moment. Like I was like, am I Moses in the burning bush? What what the hell is this? And that moment really changed everything for me. I started listening to that voice. I started um, having this hope that things were going to get better. And my intuition was right. Not too long after that, I was invited to a coffee shop. A woman who had briefly visited our church and was like, this is not for me, good for her for getting out a lot quicker. She invited me to come visit her. And when I came to the coffee shop to visit her, she introduced me to a guy that she knew who was sitting at the coffee shop. And we started chatting, and he liked to talk about theology, and I like to talk about theology. And so, we started chatting, and, the first thing people ask you is like, so what do you do? And I told him, I'm a stay-at-home daughter and I blog about biblical femininity. And he's like, what the hell is that? And so I was shocked that he didn't know because he's saying he's a Christian person. And I was like, women submitting and, all this stuff. And I started talking about my beliefs from the cult, which I honestly thought that this was a standard belief for people of that faith. And he was very puzzled and started asking me all of these follow-up questions. And turned out he believed in women's equality. And I honestly thought he was trying to lead me astray. Like I'd been told my whole life, people out on the outside world are going to try to lead you astray into this wrong, rebellious path. The thing that kind of struck me funny though was he was a man telling me that women should be equal, which I definitely never heard of that. I thought feminists were only women.
Mm.
Um, and I was just like, what? And so anyway, we had this kind of sparring conversation and then we walked away and I was honestly a little bit irritated at him. But he found me on Facebook and he kept asking me questions and just poking at me with these questions that I realized I didn't have the answers to. And one thing they really messed up with in the cult was they taught us to always look for the truth. And in their mind, the truth, you could only find it within these few pieces of literature they would give you, and you didn't have access to anything else. So finding the truth, was a really limited thing. It was kind of this false idea of being able to have knowledge, but it's only like their propaganda. But he started asking me these questions I didn't have answers to. So I decided I'm going to have to debate him. And I realized the irony in that now that as a woman who believed in submission, I was trying to debate a man and teach him how women should be submissive to men. And I didn't notice that at the time. But I started studying because that's one stereotype that is true. Homeschoolers are notoriously good debaters. So I knew that I was very solid in my ideology. Like I'd written a blog about this. My grandfather's a pastor, for God's sake, went to the church, all this stuff. So I knew that to win this debate, I would have to know what his point of view was better than him so I could kick the legs out from underneath him and just blow him out of the water, win this debate. So I started researching and studying outside of what I had been taught. And I really think this is another instance my intuition was coming through. I started looking in these different sources, reading different documents, articles, books, and what I found completely shocked me. I realized I had been lied to my whole life and
Mm.
that equality for women really was a safer, more charitable way to live in this world. And that if you're still in a religion, that there is a way, and I would argue a more accurate way to interpret scripture that supports equality for women. But it's also proven through psychology and science and sociology and all these things. And I was just being blown away by this information. And I got to this place where I realized if I keep studying this, I am going to change my mind. And if I change my mind on that, everything is going to fall apart. But my intuition came through and it kept pressing me to study it, pressing me to research it. And I came to this point where I would do this late at night because nobody was like around, everybody else was asleep. But I was just crying because I realized what could happen if I changed my mind on this. I couldn't be a stay-at-home daughter anymore. I would probably need to find a new faith community, which I'd never experienced before. I needed to start being responsible for my own decisions, for who I would marry as a life partner, and on and on. And I knew people would be very upset with me, but I knew I also couldn't live with myself if I'd seen the truth and rejected it and walked away. And my intuition just kept guiding me to keep researching. And so I did change and became pro women's equality. And the things that I feared did come true. People were not pleased with me. It was a pretty scary experience, honestly. The way I had seen others who were prodigal children or rebellious, all these things, I had seen them be treated. I started to be treated that way. And it was a jolt because I had been the good girl for so long. Um, my family did not take it well. But long story short, I started sneaking out to go on dates and to go to the movie theater and listen to Taylor Swift and turn up the beat in my car because that wasn't allowed before. I started dating instead of courting. And I was eventually introduced to my now husband, not the same guy as the one in the coffee shop, but we were set up on sort of a blind date. And I mean, those blue eyes, that Southern accent, and just He is the only man I know that can say, "Hey, baby doll," and it doesn't sound patronizing. It's just his
Oh.
voice. It's so cute. Um, and so he was really my rescue, my way out, because otherwise I probably would have had to live in my car. I was actually contemplating that. Um, but it was my intuition that told me, like, this is the right man for you. We only dated for 4 months before getting engaged, and we were only engaged for 4 months before we got married. And we've been married almost 10 years now, and it's been the best decision of my life, marrying this man. He treated me as an equal. He is 14 years older than me. Don't worry, I was an adult. Um, but it was such a comforting thing because he saw me as an equal, yet he'd had experience in the real world. And so he gave me this safe place to learn how to adult while not making me feel like I was less than. And
Mm.
from that point, I started, my nonprofit. I started speaking up about my story, and I started researching why my intuition had been right so often. I'm a very curious person. I did this experiment where I would just have my intuition say something and I would just follow it for like an entire day. And it would lead me to all these wild places where I'd have these wild encounters with people that I didn't know were going to be at these places my intuition would guide me to. People that lived out of state, my intuition would say, "You need to go to Target." And I'd be like, "I don't need anything at Target." And be like, "Go to Target." And I would go to Target. And this woman that I had known and wanted to talk to, but she lived out of state, she happened to be in town and was walking down the aisle. I felt guided to go down, things like that. I would show up at a building where I was struggling to decide if I should stay in my nanny job, and somebody would be there and they're like, "Oh, I was waiting for you. I have a message for you." Things like this started happening, and I started being like, how is this, how is this working? And so that's where I started studying the science and practice of intuition. How can I hone it? How can I know the difference between intuition and fear, intuition and anxiety? And when I kind of cracked that code, I was able to use it with starting my nonprofit, with starting my business, with moving states, with picking avocados out at the grocery store. I use it for everything. And I am just so passionate now about teaching people how you really do have this direct line to wisdom, and it's inside of you. It's not what everybody else is telling you to do. It's okay to listen to wisdom from other people, but it always needs to come back. You need to check it against your intuition. Um, I see so many people making choices out of fear and anxiety, like I once did, and they're not pleased with the results after. And so I love to teach people how to calm that anxiety down so they can know when it actually is fear versus intuition, and then amplify the intuition so they can make those decisions with confidence. There's more, but that's kind of the nutshell version. So I'll just kind of shut up and let you ask any questions.
It's such a powerful story. I love it so much. It's amazing what we're capable of when we allow ourselves to be guided in this way. And I do want to circle back around to, in a second, to the intuition versus anxiety part of that conversation. But I just want to share something that's actually going on in my life right now that's so similar as
Mm,
far as the guidance. Like, I think I just had this massive flood here.
yes.
Our whole town. And I've been holding on, to living here in this house
Mm,
and like waiting for a certain time frame and things, and just being kind of stubborn about that, not really open to relocating. But this flood happened, and all of a sudden, like, I just got this knowing,
mm,
like, it's time to go. Now it's time to go. Like, this was, the storm had to come to like wake that up in me.
mm.
And now all of a sudden stuff is there's movement and there's guidance like every day. There's like stuff falling and like really miraculous things falling into place about where I'm going and who I'm meeting. And things are just, it's just amazing what happens when we allow that in our
Yes.
lives. And like I had a similar experience when I went to New Zealand. I years ago, 20 something years ago, I kept having a recurring dream that I needed to go to New Zealand. I had
Mm.
no idea why. I didn't know anybody in New Zealand, but it was, you need to go to New Zealand for 6 months and you need to sell everything you own and go to New Zealand. And I was like, what is this? But I kept having the dream. And then I was kind of like, I was paying attention, but not really. And then I was at the gym one day and I opened up this Oprah magazine and it had the poem, Mary Oliver poem, The Journey. And
Mm.
it's, if you've ever read that poem, it's about just like your soul knows what to do. It's time to take this journey. And I went home and I like booked the plane ticket to New Zealand and I had no idea what I was doing or why. And the next day, 9/11 happened and people were like, you can't travel. And I'm like, no, I have to go. And anyway, long story short, all these obstacles presented themselves, but I got on the plane. And from the moment I stepped on the plane, it was like it was sat between two people on the plane
Mm.
where like I had no idea what I was going to do when I got off the plane. I didn't know anybody there. I didn't know where I was going, but I met a woman from Chicago on my right who was a skydive instructor, which was on my bucket list. A guy on our left was from New Zealand going home to see his mom. So he invited us to his mom's house for Sunday roast. And then her and
Wow.
I went hitchhiking to the skydive center. And my whole 6 months, I was completely guided. I never had to make a decision. Like the whole thing was so magical. It was the most amazing. Everyone thought I was crazy when I was going. Like, what do you mean you're selling everything? What do you mean I had like a really, really successful real estate career at the time, and I sold my car, I sold everything,
Wow.
and I was like, I don't know, but like, I feel like when we really allow ourselves to trust, like that's where the magic
Mhm.
happens, and so often we discount the knowing or the voices because they don't seem logical,
Yeah.
right? And we want to figure things out with our logical mind. But
Mm.
when we allow ourselves to go beyond the logic, that's where the power is. That's where the miracles happen. I don't know. That's kind of my
Oh, I love that story. And, it's one of those things where I feel like intuition speaks to us all the time, every day. It's just a matter of listening. But then on top of that, I think there's also, this is just a personal belief. I also believe that there's specific things that we're meant to do. I think a lot of life is choice. I really do. But I think then there are a few things that we're supposed to do. And no matter the obstacles, your intuition just keeps guiding you. And then these amazing things happen. It's almost like the Red Sea's parting. Like I feel that way with my husband. Like, um, I I mean, I hadn't even known him for a whole year. And he was so completely different. It like on one hand, it felt so right because I also would have these dreams about him. Um, I, I was still very religious, and so I saved myself until marriage, which I don't necessarily recommend anybody listening. Don't put so much pressure on yourself. But I would wake up at night before we got married and I would have this vivid dream that he was sitting on the edge of the bed, not in a creepy way. I know that sounds creepy, but it would just be like he was just there, like, yeah, we're cool. This is fine. And when we finally did get married, people would ask me, like, was it weird sleeping with a man for the first time? And I was like, no, like I just had these dreams. I had these feelings like that this was right. And people couldn't understand that. It just seemed weird to them. But sometimes I think there's places we're supposed to go, like New Zealand, people we're supposed to meet and do some sort of partnership. It could be romantic, it could be business related or friendship or a family member. But I think on top of like the everyday decisions of what I'm going to buy at the grocery store or should I go this way or that way on my way to work, I also think that sometimes there are these big things that we are supposed to do. And following our intuition is the way that we can accomplish that so smoothly. I see some people who fight against it and then they end up really regretting it or they make it so much harder on themselves. But I'm so glad that you just listened to those urges and just kind of went with it and the path just unfolds. It's beautiful. I love that story from you.
yeah. Yeah, I've always kind of seen it like when I listen, even when it doesn't seem logical, when I follow the
Yeah.
guidance, it's like I feel like I'm going with the flow. And when I don't listen and I try to act from my logical mind because the intuitive hits don't make sense,
Yeah.
I feel like I'm swimming upstream.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
it's a completely different feeling. Like right now, I feel like I'm literally like in a massive like avalanche downstream with everything that's like happening
Mhm.
so fast, but I'm not making the choices. Like it's all just being shown.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so it's kind of
Yeah.
effortless. Whereas if I could be like, no, no, I can't. And then I'm going to be
Right.
fighting against what's being presented.
Right.
So,
Right. Wow. I want to ask you a question if that's okay about your story. So
mm.
when you felt that urge, were you familiar with intuition? Was that something that you knew and had practiced, or was it something that this was just sort of an adventure and you were just like kind of trusting without kind of having known how it all worked?
um, this was one of my first experiences of fully trusting, but
Yeah.
so I got sober a few years before that, probably like 5 years before that happened. And when I got sober, so I was 29 when I got sober.
Mm.
So for 29 years, and especially like my mom died when I was 18 in a car accident in
Mm.
my car, and I couldn't handle it. So that's when became a drug addict and an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
everything was like numbed down. I didn't have any sense of intuition
Mm.
because I was too
Sure.
busy just like numbing myself out. And then when I got sober, I started going down like more of a spiritual path.
Mhm.
I've never been a religious person, but just really like seeing things that I had never seen before because
Yeah.
I was numbing it all out for so long. And so I
Mm.
started to get a better know, like learn more about myself and my power and um things like my intuition. But when I started having those dreams to go to New Zealand, yeah, I did see it as a sign. I did see it as
Mm.
something that I had to follow. Like I said, other people thought I was crazy. I
Yeah.
probably thought I was a little bit crazy in my head, but and especially because of all the things that happened, like with 9/11, people were like, "Can't you see you're not supposed to go?" I'm like, "No, I
Yeah.
know I'm supposed to go." Like I just knew. And
Mm.
then when I saw what happened on that trip, like the way things just effortlessly, I was guided the entire
Yeah.
time to the best place. Like I didn't even spend any money. Like I couldn't spend money if I tried on that trip. I had all this money saved up. And I just kept getting offered, to work at these different places in exchange
Mm.
for room and board. And I stayed at these beautiful
Wow.
retreat centers and like cooked breakfast for people. And then they didn't
Oh my
charge me anything,
gosh.
like it was just the whole thing was like that. And so what I learned, and I met the most amazing people, like it was just everything about it was so eye-opening. So that trip is what really taught me like what happens, like that leap in the
Mm.
net will appear kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
thing, where it's like, I have no idea why I'm doing this. I have no idea what I'm going to do when I get off the plane. Because people were
Mm.
like, what are you going to do when you get there? I'm like, I don't know. But I was just fully trusting. And by the time
Ah.
I got off the plane, I had a plan because of the people, because of where I was seated on the plane. It
Mhm.
was like, even that
Yep.
was guided.
Yep.
So that trip really taught me that I don't know. Like
Mm.
my logical mind can't even predict
Yeah.
what's in my best interest,
Hmm.
like the way that like the guidance that I've received showed me that there's more available than I could even plan for or predict
Yeah.
if I trust it.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I love that so much. It's
Mhm.
so beautiful. Mm. I
Yeah,
love
so
this
that was
conversation.
my first experience with really knowing that at a core level. I know you know it at a core level based on
Yeah.
the story that you just told as well.
Mhm.
So let me ask you this. So um and I kind of know because I took your course and
Yeah.
you went into this, and this is a really powerful distinction, but you don't have to go into as much detail as you would inside of the
Sure.
course. And we'll talk a little bit about Ashley's course in a minute for anybody that really wants to do it because it is amazing. Um, but how do you know the difference between when you're hearing some kind of voice? Like,
Mm.
is it your intuition or is it fear or anxiety? I know you spoke about that a little bit, as far as your story, but what's the difference? Like, how could someone tell the difference?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. So. There truly is a science behind it, and I do go more into that with the course because I realize you may have two different types of listeners. There are some people that are like, oh my gosh, I have felt those guided moments and I just want to trust it without question. I would just like to be able to hear that voice more often. And they're just interested in sort of amplifying that, and the why or the how doesn't really matter to them. And that's cool. I love that. But then there are also other people that are probably listening that are like, man, I feel a little bit skeptical about that. How do you know it's always right? How do you know you can actually trust it? And for those people in the course, I do talk about the science behind how it works, because what feels like a mystical woo-woo experience, and I'm not taking away from spirituality because I think you can fit it in that if you want to, but maybe that's just not how your mind works. You want to have like some evidence for like how this happens. There actually is a process that goes on in your brain. You've got the process that happens in your conscious mind, your thinking mind, and then in your subconscious mind. And just really quickly, in your conscious mind, you're aware of what everything is happening. You are thinking through problems. I always give the example of a math problem. If you are given a math problem to solve, you're going to do that in your conscious mind. You're going to do it by thinking about the math problem, remembering back to school where you learned how to work it. Then you got to work the steps of the problem. And there's a lot of room for error because maybe you forgot a step, or maybe you're dyslexic like me, where you flip the 6 and the 9 and then it throws everything off. Or maybe you get distracted, or somebody causes you to second guess. And so you kind of like, oh, wait, no, you're right. And at the end of it, it could be right, it could be wrong, but there's a lot of things influencing it. And on top of that, it's very a slow process, relatively slow process to do. And you're consciously thinking of it. But we feel like that's more accurate because we know how we got to the answer. Intuition is in your subconscious mind, and it isn't susceptible to that fear, to anxiety, to other people kind of coming in there and throwing things off. It doesn't get distracted by dyslexia, and it remembers so many things. Like, I was listening to a podcast the other day that was talking about, I want to say it's like, I could be wrong, but we see like 2 billion bits of information when we look out of our eyes, but our brains can only process about 40 bits of information at once, our conscious minds, but our subconscious is picking up on all of that, plus a lot of other things that I talk about in the program. So it has access to more information, and it doesn't have all these outside influences. And so on top of that, it's happening in your subconscious mind. So it goes through an analytical process, but it doesn't tell you the analytical process it went through. Science calls it rapid cognition as well, and it's much faster than your conscious mind. It can filter the information and get to an answer in about 1 to 3 seconds. So it's got access to so much more information than you realize your brain has. It gets through and grabs that answer quickly, but then it pings it up to your conscious mind in the form of a knowing, a seeing or hearing inside your mind, or a feeling in your body. And if you remember in my story, I felt something in my body. So it could be in your gut, it could be chills, it could be just feeling a presence. But I also heard words, and it wasn't like if you're sitting beside me, you could hear them. It came from my subconscious mind. And what I'm hearing from your story, Amy, is just like having this feeling. And so like there's different ways it communicates, but that's how you know you can trust it. So that's kind of the first thing for kind of my skeptics out there. And I go deeper into this in the course, but getting back to kind of your question, the way you can tell the difference between your intuition and your anxiety or fear is because it's operating on these different parts of your brain. Like, it's using different processes to give you information, and your fear brain is going to feel like it's based in fear. It's going to be anxious. It's going to be overwhelming. It's going to feel urgent. It's going to feel like, should I do this? Should I do that? It's going to feel like gloom and doom and worst case scenario. And oh my gosh, the planes just, crashed at 9/11. Should I go? Should I not? It's going to feel like other people pressuring you. Like, this is the societal norm. How could you do that? It's going to feel like all of this hyperactive energy that's going to be spinning around, feeling urgent and anxious. Intuition is going to feel calm, cool, clear, concise, emotionless, and it's going to be based in love and expansion. You might feel fear about what your intuition says because your fear brain, your ego brain might react to it, but your intuition isn't actually going to use fear to get your attention. Even in a crisis moment, it's going to be like, don't trust that person. Instead of, don't trust that person. You could be this, it could be that. What about their race? What about their sexual identity? It's not going to throw all of these like prejudicial things on a person. It's just going to be like, no, you can't trust this person, or yes, you should take that trip. And you might then have emotions about what it says, but it's not going to use those emotions. It's going to be very calm, cool, clear, concise, emotionless. And the based in love and expansion part is where you can really trust that it has your good and the good of everyone around you in mind. Um, the expansion part is going to be often taking you outside of your comfort zone, doing something you've never done before. For me, leaving a cult, asking questions about my belief system, knowing that everything was going to fall apart if I just questioned that one thing. For you, Amy, like leaving on a trip, you didn't even know what you're going to do coming off the plane. It's expansive. It's bringing you to something that is out of the comfort zone. The fear and anxiety is going to want to keep you in its perceived safe bubble. And I say perceived because your fear brain thinks anything outside of the comfort zone is scary and dangerous. And that is useful if you're actually, running from a saber-toothed tiger, back in the day, or like nowadays when there's a bear in the woods. But other than that, it's usually not very useful, like in the workplace or in your relationship, or when you're trying to make a big decision for your life. And so it's important to respect fear and anxiety because there are occasions where it's useful, but those occasions are honestly very small. And most of the time, the fears we have, as logical as we think they are, they're only based in a little tiny bit of information and keeping us in the comfort zone instead of the expansiveness of what intuition knows. So that's how I like to kind of share the difference between the two.
I love this. And it was reminding me of a lot of things that I'm going through right now. Like I was saying,
Mm,
what's going on with my home and everything, because it's been very cumbersome, overwhelming, like everything that's
mm,
happened to my house and all of it's been hard on my body, just like getting
yeah.
rid of all of my belongings that got destroyed, and they're so sopping wet, and it's been emotional and just really hard and frantic, because it's
Yes.
like mold and blah, blah, blah. You got to move fast.
Mhm.
And in the process of that and feeling like just so overwhelmed and so like it's just been really, really, really hard in a lot of ways.
Mm,
Um, at the same exact time, like I said, I have this knowing that it's like there's something on the other side. There's something bigger on the other side. It's time to, like, rather than feeling like I need to frantically put my house back together, what if this isn't my house anymore?
mm,
Like, you know what I mean? Like, what about
mm,
that? And
yeah.
when I hear that, it's like you said, like part of me gets like when I think about that, but there's also like this peaceful knowing that like it
Yeah.
just feels so much better than the other. And
Mm,
like one of my friends who lives here, when I was telling her like, where I'm at, she said, she started crying. She's like, I don't want to see you go and I love you, but I think you need to spread your wings and fly. And when she said it, I got like those chills again. I was like, that's exactly how I'm feeling
yes.
right now. Like it's,
Mm,
and, I think, and I don't know if this has to do with intuition, but you know how they say like the universe will like poke you with a stick, and if you don't listen, it'll hit you over the head with a 2x4.
Yeah,
Like that's
yeah.
kind of what I feel is happening right now. Like I've had my house has been flooding, like there's been all this different stuff that's been happening for a long time. And I'm like,
Mhm.
no, I'm not going anywhere. And then this last storm, which was insane, like we got
Yeah.
20 inches of rain in like a matter of hours. And I mean, it was insane. Like it's not salvageable.
Mhm.
And so that felt like the 2x4. And,
Mhm.
one other one of my friends is like, you're being really stubborn. Like you need to listen to the signs. And it's kind of like, yeah, sometimes a storm has to come and
Yeah.
show us the way, like
Mhm.
when we're not listening,
Right.
And so I feel like the guidance has always been there.
Hmm.
I didn't want to listen to it because I had my
Hmm.
own agenda about why I needed to
Yeah.
stay here for another 2 years. And so again, going back to like my agenda versus my intuition, the universe's
Mm.
agenda, like
Yeah.
which one actually knows, right? And so according to like the way that you just explained it made so much sense to me because it feels
Mm.
like, yeah, my agenda feels small and urgent and scary
Mm.
and um you know, just I don't know. I don't even know exactly how to describe it. And then the other one just
Mm.
feels expansive and
Yeah.
like flying, getting out of the
Yeah.
comfort,
Yeah.
leaping and letting the net appear without knowing what's going to happen or why
Mm.
you're being called to do that, but just knowing that there's something on the other side of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I love that. And there's something called the sensitivity scale, and I actually get into this in one of my deeper courses um, with intuition, kind of further down the line. But there there is kind of a process that your intuition often goes through. So if it's something important, it will try to get your attention very gently. And that's honestly the easiest time to follow it with the least amount of, I don't like to use the word consequences because it's not like your intuition punishes you, but um, the longer we don't follow our intuition, the more we become out of alignment with our current reality, which just naturally becomes very uncomfortable.
Mm.
And so the quicker we listen to our intuition, the easier it is and the more flowing it often feels. The longer we wait or ignore, um, the more disconnected we become with the reality that we're in because it's not meant for us anymore. And again, it's not a punishment, it's just your intuition trying to say, like, hey, over here is like really where you're supposed to be. And if you stick in one area that you're not supposed to be, then things just start going in a way that aren't in alignment with what you need, what you want. And it's not to say that hard things don't happen when we're following our intuition, but a lot of times they feel more like this is a lesson I meant to learn versus sometimes on the other hand, it kind of just feels like, oh, this just feels like suffering,
Yeah.
But it does that because the more uncomfortable we get with the reality we're not supposed to be in, the more that allows us to wake up to like, oh yeah, I'm not actually supposed to be here. It's going to be so much easier on, the other side, going to the other direction. And that can be our external environment, but sometimes it can be our physical bodies too.
Yeah.
Um, like with stress, if somebody's working in a job that they really don't, are not a match for, they might start getting a little tension in their shoulder and neck from the stress. And then the more they don't listen to that, now it starts to turn into migraine headaches. And the more they don't listen to that, the more frequent the headaches become. And it's not a punishment, it's just kind of, you're no longer a fit for this environment. And because you're not a fit, it just starts to feel more and more uncomfortable. So something happens or things build in your body. And I don't believe that's always why we get sickness and illness. I'm not somebody that believes that, but I think sometimes um, it's just like this sign that like, I don't fit here anymore. My body or my environment is just trying to tell me like, oh, you're actually meant to be over here and you'll
Mm-hmm.
feel a lot happier over there.
Oh my God, this makes so much sense. Like my friend just said to me yesterday, she goes, Amy, you're living in Groundhog Day. Like, can't you see? It's like
Mhm.
constant suffering. Like, get out
Yeah,
of the suffering. And it's like just
right.
like what you were talking about. She said it's like that is it Einstein that said like insanity is doing the same thing
Yeah,
over and over, expecting to
yeah.
get a different result? And it's like,
Mm.
oh, I get it now. So
Yeah.
is there a way that so like in my thing that I'm going through right now, like this has been it's almost like the signs have been there for a while and I'm just now coming, I had to
Hmm.
learn the hard way basically. I had to get hit
Yeah.
over the head with a 2x4. So is there a way that somebody can like is there like a do you have any kind of a way that people can use to just learn faster or know sooner that, they're not in alignment and that it's time to listen to, these crazy knowings that they're having or something without having to go through the suffering part of it. Like you said, it's easier if you listen sooner, but how can somebody start to get better at doing that?
Sure. Yeah. So, I have a couple different courses, intuition or intuitive AF, that really kind of helps people understand how intuition works. And I talk about how you can ask for signs from the universe. And so some of it comes down to um, being very intentional with setting aside time to check in because your intuition does speak to you, but you also have the opportunity to speak to it, to invoke your intuition. And inside Intuitive AF, I talk about a couple different ways you can invoke it, ways you can set aside time to ask it powerful questions and get answers, ways you can ask specifically for signs from the universe. And I give like a whole formula for that and why it works with something in your brain called the reticular activating system. But a lot of it happens when we specifically ask for the information because sometimes it is really quiet. And if we can have a practice of like, hey, I'm just starting my week, I'm just tuning in, intuition, what do I need to know? So sometimes it's just about asking your intuition the questions. Set aside time, like maybe at the beginning of the week, and just being like, intuition, what what am I missing? What do I need to see? What message do you have for me? And getting into a little bit of a meditative state, asking the question, and then seeing what comes up in the first 1 to 3 seconds. Because remember the rapid cognition thing. So that can be really helpful. There's also a ton of different practices I love to teach about connecting with your intuition. But I think the biggest thing is, particularly when we are deepening our connection, our relationship with intuition, spending time with it and not just waiting for it to speak to us, but initiating a conversation, that can really be helpful because it gives us additional times to practice and understand when it's speaking, like trying it with low stakes things. Like I always give the example of picking out avocados in the grocery store because it's low stakes. It's not something that's like a life or death situation. But hearing its voice and getting really familiar with it on a regular basis, it just makes it so much easier for us to notice when it's speaking, but then also kind of directly asking questions of like, what am I missing? Things like that can help you open your eyes to seeing the things that maybe have been right in front of you, but you've been so busy because it's not always fear that keeps us from following our intuition. Sometimes it's distraction. Sometimes it's we're just so in the flow of doing life and we're so busy that a lot of times taking that pause, it's like any good relationship, spending time and putting in as much as you're taking out, that is what strengthens it and allows you to build that intimacy and connection really with yourself because intuition is a part of you, but also to be able to understand and hear that voice more clearly. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And I know like you go into more in the course and like I said before, I took Ashley's course, her intuitive AF course, and it's an incredible course. And one of the other things that she taught in there that I loved was, how to like ask your intuition for a sign and then get the sign. And, there's a lot of like cool things that we can do to really start to to see the signs so that we can start to trust it on a deeper level. And I love
Mm.
all the EFT process that you took us through. I
Yeah, the
mean,
tapping. Yeah.
the EFT, for anyone that doesn't know, is emotional freedom technique. And in Ashley's course, she took us through a process of using that as well in our intuition practice. And yeah, just so many powerful things. And I guess now would be probably a good time to just let people know more about your course. First of all, let me just start. We don't normally, usually people don't start off telling people how much things cost, but I just can't believe how inexpensive this course is. And I feel like people need to know up front so that when she starts talking about it and you're like, oh my God, this sounds amazing. Like it literally is affordable to everyone. I believe
$33.
Ashley just, yeah,
Yeah.
$33. She wants people to have this information. And she's
Yeah.
such a good teacher. Like I can't stress it enough. I mean, you've probably gathered that from this conversation, but the way that she teaches it, as you've heard from my stories, like I've been practicing doing a lot with my intuition for a good part of my life now, half my life now. But her course really helped me learn some things to help me take it further. And so I'll let you tell them a little bit more. And while you're doing that, like one of the things also to know is that Ashley talks about how to become an intuition master. There's different
Mhm.
levels of mastery when it comes to intuition. And so her $33 course is the gateway to more of
Mm.
that. So feel free to talk about, the levels of mastery or what, anything that you want to
Sure.
share with people so that they know what's available on the other
Yeah.
side of any type of an investment with you.
Sure. So you're right about the price. It is very affordable, the $33. And some people might ask, like, why would you be offering like a three-part course with all these different tools for that little money? Well, it's actually very selfish of me because I have this belief that when you follow your intuition, you make life better for yourself, but then you're also making life better for the world. So I want to live in a world where more people are using their intuition because it's going to make the world a better place for me too. Okay. Like I care about you as a person 100%. Like I want you as an individual, but also selfishly, I know that when people use these tools, it makes them not only be in alignment with their own good, but that is a ripple effect that will affect me and will affect everybody. And so I want to live in a world where more people are trusting their intuition.
Me
And so
too.
yeah, with Intuitive AF, I want you to be able to have like these practical tools to really get started. Yes, I do have other levels, and I'll talk about those in a minute, but it's one of those things where even if you feel like, oh, okay, I've used my intuition before, I'd love for you to still take the program because I think you can bring it up a notch. I really do.
And I do.
Understanding. Good, good. Yeah, like understanding the science behind it can give you such an additional level of confidence with it, knowing how to kind of ease that anxiety down. Because at the end of the day, the goal is to make decisions with confidence. You know, we we live in a world where there's a lot of scary stuff, and we live in a world where internally we feel fear and anxiety for a variety of different reasons, whether it's past traumas from relationships or toxic forms of religion or from, a variety of different things. And when we make decisions from that place, we're usually not happy with the results, and it usually leads us to a path where we really don't want to be. And so when you can know that intuition works, understand the science behind it, but then have these practical tools to help you hear it better, to access it, to get real deal signs from your intuition, from the universe. And like I say, like there's even science behind that. I talk about something called the reticular activating system. So it's good for people who are already all in with their intuition and they want to learn more. It's good for people who are a little bit skeptical, but at the end of the course, I want you to have a game plan of like, here are things I can practically do to make my life better because I feel so much more confident with making decisions. So yeah, it's $33. It's an on-demand course, and it's something that, you could spread out over a period of time, but you could probably also get done within 3 or 4 hours if you just want to sit and if you're kind of like somebody who wants to just binge some content. But yeah, it's got so many tools. Then I have sort of this roadmap to becoming an intuition master because I can't teach you everything in 3 hours. Intuition is a vast subject. So my next kind of level is something called Intuition Incubator. And this is where we go even deeper in on the fears and anxieties. We figure out how to stop second guessing. We talk about cognitive distortions, things we've picked up from our childhood, beliefs that we have, inner child wounding that is really holding us back from trusting ourselves, trusting our intuition, and keeping us from having the life that we truly desire. Then we talk about even more tools to go in and hear your intuition, ways you can activate it in your life so it becomes so strong and powerful that this just becomes a part of who you are every day. And then what good is intuition if you're not using it to accomplish your goals? So the whole second half of Intuition Incubator is how to use your intuition to manifest your goals. There's a 4-step process to manifesting with your intuition. Other people will teach you how to manifest, but a lot of times people are teaching you to manifest based out of fear, scarcity, lack, and peer pressure. And don't get me wrong, you can still get things from those places, but the goals you're setting are likely not things that are in alignment with your true deep desires. They're often surface level things we feel like we have to have due to scarcity or pressure. And so we kind of turn that on its head and say, you know, at the end of the day, I don't just want you to manifest shit. I want you to manifest stuff that you are going to be happy, satisfied, and fulfilled with. And here is a blueprint of how to get that using your intuition. It's like this life hack. I also offer one-on-one coaching, and I have my intuition mastery program that I lead people through one-on-one for that. The intuition incubator one I talked about there. When you go through it, there's the option to experience group coaching calls with that, so you can ask me questions. But whichever level you do or levels you do, I feel confident that it's going to help you get clearer on what your intuition sounds like and help you make decisions with confidence. But as you kind of go up into these different levels, I just give you more tools and I help you clear more shit out that's holding you back. And I give you more and more information because, like I said, intuition is a vast subject. And when you can master it, that is when your life changes. And I want lives to change. Again, for the individual person, I care for people as individuals, but I also know and believe with everything in my being that, look, if our politicians were using their intuition, we would not be having these wild debates. If our world leaders were using their intuition, we would have already solved poverty. If, we wouldn't have abusive relationships. If people were truly following their intuition instead of trying to harm other people. There's so many things that I think this makes the world a better place. That I just want you to have that for yourself, but also for the world. I want you to be able to make those decisions in life, in love, and in your business.
That's so awesome. I love it. I love it. I love it. Yeah. And I can't recommend her work enough. Again, if you're interested in, I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. Intuitive AF is a no-brainer because it's like 3 hours of your time where if you think about how much time we waste
Mm,
making decisions that are not in alignment or
yeah.
not being sure and taking forever to try to figure things out rather than just being able to tap in and know what to do. And it's a good investment, not only financially, because it's such a small investment financially, but it's such a good investment of your time as well to just get the clarity and get the tools and get on track. And yeah, it's so powerful. And so if anybody is interested in learning more about that, depending on where you're listening or watching this, there'll be a link below this video or in the show notes of the podcast where you can get direct access to Intuitive AF. And also, if you don't have my guide yet, I have a free guide where I'm going to go over um, 5 steps that I've personally used over the years to help me like tap in and activate my intuition so that I can trust it and use it in my business and in my life. So I have that free guide, and in that free guide, you're also going to get um, a bonus training with Ashley, as well as more information about Intuitive AF in there as well. So all of those links will be below. And other than that, is there any other places you want to tell people to find you?
Sure.
Uh,
I'm on Instagram at I am Ashley Easter. You'll see I do 2 things. One is my intuition work, and one is my nonprofit work for abuse survivors. So my main place that you'll find the intuition stuff is that I am Ashley Easter on Instagram, and then Facebook is sort of a mix of advocacy and intuition work. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I love that you've gone on to create a nonprofit and do all of this amazing work in the world to help victims and help, just help people to be able to trust their intuition on a deeper level. So much good has come out of your own experience with your intuition and leaving the cult and everything like that. And it's just so inspiring to see. Yeah. Are there any closing thoughts you want to leave people with, or anything I didn't ask or we didn't talk about that you think is important for people to know today?
I think the final thing is just you don't have to struggle with making decisions. Um, there are legitimately tools you can use to make decisions with confidence. And it is such a freeing feeling when you're able to know, even if there's some residual fear there, but that there's a difference between making decision in that fear and recognizing that it exists and using tools to kind of quiet it. Um, I just I just want you to know that you don't have to keep living in the second guessing place where you're constantly feeling like am I making the right decision? Should I do this? Should I do that? Like, to me, that does feel like suffering, and you don't have to have that. That's why it feels so important to me to share these intuition principles, because I know how much better it feels when you can just use your intuition and get really clear on what it sounds like and get guidance for your life and in any area, like I say, life, love, and business.
So beautiful. Uh, I could talk to you about this forever.
This has been
Mm,
so fun. Thank you for having me on.
absolutely. You're such a wealth of information, and you give me hope, not just for myself, but like you said, for mankind, the more people that, you know, learn from you and follow their intuition and the ways that you teach, the better we're all going to be. So thank you for giving me hope.
Mm.
And
And the magic is in you. Like, I'm just giving information, but I really believe that the magic is in each individual. And I'm just really honored to be able to share that so people can tap into themselves. Yeah.
and that's kind of what, when I went through the course, like that's how I felt, like after each session,
Mhm.
like I felt like it was like a remembering that,
Mhm.
remembering that I have the magic in me. I just needed to be shown, at a deeper level how to access it. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's
Love
super,
that.
super powerful. Um, and anyway, I'm just going to say, in case anybody's listening and they're not where they can click on a link or whatever, if you go to amystarallen.com/intuitive AF, that will take you directly to Ashley's amazing course that I did, that I just want to be an advocate for because it's so good, and I just really feel like everybody needs to do it.
Thank
So
you. I hope that people do. Like,
yeah,
I really enjoy teaching it. And yeah, thank you so much.
yeah, yeah, awesome. All right, everybody. Well, that's going to be a wrap for today. We'll see you all back here in the next episode, and have an amazing day. Bye
Bye.
for now.